Wonderful. Okay, well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much. What an honor. Look at all you folks here today. Just want to start, of course, with an acknowledgement. We're here at the office located on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. So grateful to be here, and actually the ancestral name of what this place is called was Kamkamale, which is now, the downtown east side in Vancouver. So thanks for coming. So many of you here today. What the intention of today is around acknowledging the building and sharing space and time for memories, and looking forward and sharing Sarah, our Director of System Change and Legal, about what's going on in our eviction project. I just want to thank the board members who are on this call. Saw Heather and Elizabeth. I want to thank there's First Ward cabinet members here, Carrie and Nancy. I don't know if I've missed folks. And just thank you for taking the time on this beautiful day in July. So there have been many significant years, as we know, at First United, and one of them this past year, of course, has been one of those. We have said goodbye to our well-worn but beloved building, and what a year it's been. We've moved into 6 locations, for all of you that have been on this journey with us: advocacy, spiritual care, community help desk, our shelter, administration, our commissary kitchen that's offsite. And then we even launched our innovative food truck program that comes to the corner of Gore and Hastings, Monday to Friday, 12 o'clock, serving that corner since we've been doing since the 1930s. And so here we are, as many of you are aware, after incredible hazmat removal and asbestos delays. The demolition did start a few weeks ago. And as we were preparing for that demolition, we really wanted to do a couple of activities to say goodbye. And one of which was saying goodbye to the cross. We needed to remove the cross, this beacon of hope that has always been in our community. And so on a weekend a few weeks ago, our leadership team and our board gathered, and we stood outside, and Reverend Jen, who's on the call today, read us some parting words. I'm just going to share a sentence with you folks to really mark the end of an era, and that a new building will rise. And she said, "We say goodbye to what is, that which is before us, derelict, deconstructed, and soon to be destroyed, and we await what will be, the promise of hope for the future, the vision of a new building that will serve the community for years to come. Hope lives here, and we are here." And so as we continue to prepare as well for our demolition, we went through some community engagement, which we've been doing this whole process. Obviously, that is so imperative to have our community centered in this. And this is us, handing out our flyers that show where our locations are during transition. But we wanted to let folks know that the demolition was actually, happening the next day. Tim Horton should be a sponsor of ours, handing out some donuts. And it's actually not one person, not 2 people, probably even more than 3 were joking around with us saying, I didn't really think that the demolition was happening. We thought you changed your mind to do a renovation because it was taking so long to come down. We assured them it was. And I just can't quite describe the excitement around what this new building and additional programs and housing is going to bring to the neighborhood. Another significant activity we did was around this magnolia tree, stunning, beautiful magnolia tree. And you might know that there isn't a lot of shade in the downtown east side. There's barely any green space, and this tree, whether it blooms or leaves in the hot summer days, provides such amazing shade for folks. We had the stairs on the Gore side. We didn't shoo people away. And in the process of having to do the demolition, we knew over the last couple of years, we couldn't save the tree. They couldn't uproot it. They tried to be as creative as possible, but we weren't able to. And just about a couple of weeks before the demolition started, a community member was getting, upset about the tree. It's just such a big symbol in a community. And the things that keep you up at night, this was the one, was that magnolia tree. And so we kept going, tried again, got another horticulturist in, and for the landscapers, gardeners on the call today, someone came and did what's called propagating and said it was just the perfect time of year. And we have some photos of the horticulturist taking about 32 branches and to replant offsite. And as I think through and reflect, there's such a metaphor here. We couldn't take the tree as it was in the state that it was, but we we did it differently. It wasn't the way we envisioned it to be, but 32 of these branches are kept off site somewhere else, and some are going to grow and some won't. Some will take more root and others won't, but at least maybe one or two will grow again, and they'll grow on their own time, but we're going to walk alongside them as they do it. And as I continue to reflect on what that metaphor is, it is quite a relief to still have a piece of that magnolia tree, but planted elsewhere. And so then we began the demolition. So we've got some interior photos here. I can't even begin to comprehend how many memories must have happened in the sanctuary. Here's the interior here, the weddings and the funerals and the services, the ministries and the memories here. Then the exterior, when they said they were ready to go, I walked to work the morning. I go to the site every morning. And when I came home, half of it was gone. And I was so taken aback that it was finally happening. And so many people throughout the last couple of weeks have been taking photos and pausing. I've never seen so many people around a site just watching the demolition, and not out of the curiosity, I think, from the process, but just reflecting. And then this last photo is where we're at now. It's going to be done within a week, fully done. And so as far as our timeline goes, what happens then is what's called below grade construction, where it's excavation and shoring. After a few months of that, it goes above grade. And that means that 24 or so months after that happens, the project's complete, which brings us to about October 2025. If not sooner, apparently. So this, demolition may mark the end of an era, but it's also a beginning of a new one. But again, I just want to say, before I open it up, what memories and ministry have happened in this building. We've seen so many individuals get married there, so much service, ministry, programs, fellowship, community, and that there's been a couple of really big, there's been many things, but things that have stuck with me as I'm reviewing everything is around, of course, the wish drop-in. Our place has always been a place where we tested ideas and adapted to what the needs are. And in the 80s, when it was, I think, St. Michael's Anglican Church lost their government funding to have a women's drop-in shelter for sex workers, we brought it into First United and did that ministry for the next couple of decades. And they are now, in their own location as well. And they're still thriving, of course. And then there's insight, harm reduction, safe sites to test. And actually we had, and so sure so many of you are aware, we had the first mock-up to do the insight safe injection sites where government officials and folks could walk around and visualize and see what was going to happen there, to pilot it and then expand it. And as we know, it's across North America now, and these overdose prevention sites are imperative in our response to combat the drug poisoning, where rarely any deaths happen in these sites. Other things have always happened over the decades are foot care, legal clinic, tax clinic. We've got a couple of names on the screen. This is some time that we want to just really open it up and to share some memories. And I'm going to start with Jean and Blair, and I'm going to invite Jean to put your mic on and to share with us some memories of what has happened in this building when as you've been involved.
Thank you. Gee, I didn't know I was going to be first on. I'll try and limit my time. My first involvement with First United would be back in the early 1980s. And I will actually start with 1988 as being a very crucial time in my involvement with First United. And just a couple of notes I wrote down before coming into this meeting. For me, First United, the doors were always open. There was never a closed door. I think when we had the shelters, I think we used to close it for an hour for cleanup or something like that, but doors were always open. It was a place of refuge. It was a safe place for the neighbors. I recall back in the days, and maybe someone can remind me who the minister was. It was a woman, and I think she moved to Victoria. Anyway, we had the sanctuary, we had the pews, and she opened up the doors. And I remember going in there a number of times, and people were just sleeping on the benches. And what a good use for the pews, right? We weren't running services or anything, so it made a safe haven for people there. It was safe for them. They were able to lie down, have a rest. It was a place where people could just hang out, have a coffee, chat. The advocacy program, which continues, I think, to be, the program of First United, along with all its multitude of other programs. I remember folks lining up. I used to do, I don't know, I did some volunteer stuff there or something like that. And people would line up in the morning, and the advocates made them welcome. They addressed their housing needs. They provided assistance in terms of looking at financial assistance and things like that. And I just want to quickly reflect on one story which really sticks in my mind. And I think I've shared this with some of you in the past. 1988, 89, HIV/AIDS raised its ugly head. And at that time, I was working for an agency in the downtown East Side. The reality is our agencies then, we did not know what to do. We didn't know what we were doing. We were winging it. And in many instances, we were unaccepting of people who had been diagnosed as HIV positive. We were not prepared to become involved. We were afraid. I was working with one particular woman, and First United was the one place in the downtown East Side that said yes to me when I was looking for assistance for this woman. Her name was Lynn, and she did eventually pass away. But First United did not turn us away. When I sought assistance from them, they supported me, and together, along with St. Paul's Hospital, they provided emotional support and a peaceful closing for the life of Lynn. So I thank First United for that, particularly in terms of always keeping their doors open to the community. And I think Amanda, you just mentioned, and I wrote it down. First United has always provided hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean, for sharing that. I'd like to invite Blair to say some words.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to just do two short stories, and one is about my predecessor, Bob Stewart, who many of you will know, and he was one of the first people that I met when I came to Vancouver from Winnipeg, when I was enrolled in the Archival Studies program, and I lived at VST, and of course that's where the archives was then. So I got to know Bob, and he was brilliant, and we talked about archives, and definitely knew he was a lefty politically. But meanwhile, I'd heard about this wonderful minister who preached at First United Church in the early 90s, and it was Gary Patterson at the time. And so I'd go with some of the theologues, and we'd, after worship, we'd have coffee. And who did I see but Bob Stewart with a mop in his hand, I think. And it turned out that, as you will know probably, but he was living there, and he was also custodian during the weekend. And I later learned that he was really very involved in the church. He served on the board. He started First Things First newsletter. He was on support committees for theological students doing internships. He led the Saturday night fellowship. And he was really hoping to write sort of a definitive history on First United, but his health started failing, and unfortunately he died before he could do that. So fortunately, Bob Burrows took up that calling. But I just wanted to lift Bob Stewart up as someone for whom First United was really in his bones, and he was a significant presence there. And the other little illustration is just my own experience at probably the most meaningful communion service that I attended. It was Thanksgiving, and Gary Patterson was presiding. And I remember with those services that you would go in and it would be the core members of the congregation, but then gradually people from the community who weren't necessarily members of the congregation would come in, and as Jean was saying, lie down on the pews, or sometimes disrupt the service, that sort of thing. But the regular people were Elizabeth Hart, I can remember, and David Hodge, and so many other, Jean Budden probably, but I didn't know a lot of people at that time. But I remember the worship service culminated in this communion service, and we all, as I remember it, circled around the table, both congregants and people from the community, and it ended up with, on the table was this huge spread of, you know, bread and grape juice, but also all manner of fresh fruit, vegetable, probably baking, vegetable dips. And it was just a feast, and people mingled together. And to me, that really shifted my understanding of what communion or the Lord's Supper is about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. I'm going to invite, we've got board members on here. Heather, do you have anything to share with us today? Heather Clark. I think there's a couple of Heathers. Hi.
Just get myself unmuted here. Well, what a pleasure it is to be asked to share memories. So I have downstairs and upstairs memories, and both are equally as important and memorable. The downstairs one really started, I belong to Shaughnessy Heights United Church, and Shuck, as it's known, has been a long time supporter and involved in the at first. And so my first experience was, and I thought it was Wednesday night, but it might have been Saturday night, fellowship night, a night that movies were showing anyway. And we'd come down, bring sandwiches, and watch the movie with the folks. And I thought, oh my goodness, they're so animated, and they're really focusing in on this. And it was such a special night, and these sandwiches that we made at or we didn't make at the church, but people provided those sandwiches. And that was my first experience of sort of being in the presence of First United. The church and myself have always supported First United. So that gave me some insight as to the importance of the downtown East Side community and an opportunity for them to get together. But my experience in the downstairs also was community building for Shuck, because later on, I can't remember when we started this, but we would make and serve Saturday lunches once a month. Our specialty was chili and potatoes and buns and whatever salady or fruit stuff that we had. But I say it was community building for Shuck because some of us went early in the morning to prepare all the food. Others came a little later to serve, and it was all plated and taken to the tables by the Shuck members. And that was really community building as well for us, and an eye-opener for many members of our church that how grateful these people were that came in to have a really healthy meal, and maybe two if there was enough, and maybe take some home if there was enough. So that was great time, because I so appreciated the community building for Shuck, as well as serving another community. And then I got involved in foot care, and because Elizabeth is on the program today, I'm not going to steal the thunder of foot care, because that's really Elizabeth's specialty. But I got involved in that, and had students from BCIT, and I can't remember where else. And it was such a pleasure to introduce them and to see how understanding and relationship building they were, instead of pulling away from these people who may act a little different. But I'll let Elizabeth go into foot care, which I'm sure she will. And another just memorable experience for me in the downstairs. This young man, I think he was from Jamaica, and he was volunteering, and mostly volunteering with foot care. I think he volunteered with the help desk a bit. And then he was employed as a janitor. I called him Big John. And we got to talking, and Big John says to me, you know, I really didn't want to come down to the downtown east side. I was really scared. Wasn't sure exactly what he was scared of, but he thought he might be harmed. And he just opened up and said, but there's nothing to be scared of. And he was right in the community of the downtown east side and serving first. And I don't know what happened to John. Big John may still be around when we get back in the building. And then my upstairs story, I'll just make it short. I forget when I joined the board, and I had been upstairs to one or two of the offices, but I had never been through the Warren's nest of trying to find my way down to the boardroom. And worse than that, trying to get through the back of the building down to the kitchen. At that time, we had our board meetings on site, and we had dinner from the kitchen that we brought up to the boardroom. And I thought, oh, I got to keep with the group or I'm going to get lost, and I don't know where I'll find myself or where I'll find the group. And it was a great cozy meeting room, and I've just been privileged to be on the board since then, and I can't remember when, but it's all been so good, and I've got so many memories, and I can't share all the ones that I've had discussions with people from the downtown east side, and you just never know what their background is for being there, and one shouldn't make too many assumptions about who these people are, because they surprised me. So those are my memories, and I'm looking forward to making a lot more memories in the new building. So
thanks so much, Heather. And Heather is our board chair, is helping navigate us through this intense transition time. So thank you for your leadership and support during this and your commitment. We've called Elizabeth into the conversation with foot care. I mean, choose your own adventure, but we'd love to hear your experience with foot care.
Thank you. Yeah, so many experiences, and I want to thank Don Robertson for inviting me to come down to First United for a tour back in 2008. And my first the experience that I had when we went into what is, I guess, where the dining hall is now, the gym. And I saw a man, his back, playing the piano, Jimmy. Many of you will know Jimmy. And it was this most exquisite music. And I was literally moved to tears listening to him play. And so I said to Don, who's that? I thought it was maybe a staff member or something. And Don said, oh, that's Jimmy. He hangs around here as one of the community members. And I was just like, wow, I can't believe that somebody that can play music so exquisitely that moved me to tears is a member of this community. So it's sort of like, I really want to hang around here and learn more about people, because obviously I have a different impression of what people down here in the downtown east side are like, or hanging out at First United. And so the next week I started foot care and would go Tuesday mornings, and I met, as Heather said, some amazing people, conversations. I don't want to really say too much because I won't stop talking, but I was really shocked and moved to see the picture of foot care, and that was Stuart. And he was one of the early people I met. And he hung around for a long time. Unfortunately, he deteriorated over time, but he would always come, and he really loved First United. And I wonder if he's still around, but I'm very grateful for having the many years of doing foot care and how it's just totally changed my worldview. about many issues, but I was so wrong on what I thought people were like, I'd see pictures of drug users on TV, and I realized I had it completely wrong. These are people just like us. Something's happened to them in their life, and they want all the same things that we do. And they all talked about their mothers. They all talked about wanting to have a job and go out for a meal sometime to a restaurant. I remember one fellow said to me, I don't know how the conversation came up, but I must have asked, what would you like to do? And he said, you know what I'd really like to do is get dressed up and take you out for dinner to a nice restaurant. I was just, anyway, enough of that. On to somebody else, but thank you for letting me share a few stories.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And also thank you for your leadership and being on the board for years, in addition to being the board chair of First United Housing. Thank you so much for everything and your support and commitment. And also, hi, Rudy, who is on our capital campaign cabinet. I didn't see that the two of you were on there. So hello, welcome. We have time for one more. And since I can hear an appetite for people wanting to share more, I feel like we have just created a new Toast Talks tradition to be able to, when we convene, to hear more voices from the folks that come onto the screen with us, to hear more stories. So I personally commit to, if anyone wants to continue to share, that this next year and during our construction, that we will always leave space for other voices, your voices, to be able to also share stories and memories. Every time I gather with you folks and have an opportunity to listen, I get even more humbled and overwhelmed by the history of this place. And so, since the first person, how about Douglas Jameson? I invite you to come and share some memories with us as well.
Okay, I've just unmuted myself. Greetings from the thrift store basement of Trinity Grace United Church in the Fraser Hood. My memory of First United goes back to 1981. At that time, the gay male community of Vancouver was forming the Vancouver Men's Chorus. And I believe Bob Smith was the minister then, and we were invited to rehearse at First United Church. And in 1981, I don't think there would be very many congregations in Vancouver that will welcome 100 gay men to come and sing in their sanctuary. We rehearsed there for 1 year before moving to the Vancouver Academy of Music. And after 42 years of existence, the Vancouver Men's Chorus is still an integral part of the choral community here in Vancouver. But I love to remind people that our roots actually were in First United Church. And as many people of my generation that spent their childhood and adolescence in the United Church, most of my adult life, the church was irrelevant to me. But at a time in my life when I wanted to find a community of people that shared my values, I remembered the welcome that First United Church had given 100 singing gay men. And I actually became a member of the congregation at First United Church and was there until the congregation closed. Far too many memories, Amanda, but maybe I'll write them down and forward them to you. And look forward to, can't wait for the new building, and I'll really look forward to the opening. Thank you.
Wonderful. Oh, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. And last, we're going to ask, there's Isabella, if you would like to share a story.
Hi, yes, great to see some faces here that I have nice connections with. I was an itinerant employment counselor in the downtown East Side from 1999 to 2005. And twice a week, I worked out of First United. And when I first got there, I was immediately drawn to the morning service there, the 15-minute morning service in the pews, where people were sleeping off their hangovers, drinking their coffee and their soup, and storing their bicycles behind the altar, and all of those things. And I thought, this is my kind of church. And Pastor Bruce at that time immediately noticed my enthusiasm And within a short amount of time, he needed to go away for 6 weeks, and he was looking for people to take place, take part in the service and lead it. And he asked me whether I wanted to do it, and I said, okay. So from then on, many of the mornings that I worked there, I would lead the service. And I made a commitment to do the service no matter what. And about 2 times, there was nobody else there, just me. And one of those times, I went through the whole service, did everything that I had planned, and ended with I forgot what the ending hymn was. It was a round. And as I was starting to sing the round, there came a disembodied voice from upstairs, and it was Ruth. And such an unforgettable memory. Oh, brings tears to my eyes. Thank you.
I just wondered if I could say hello. This is Stephen Gray.
Sure can. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to start into stories because I wouldn't stop, but I just wanted to say hi. It's been a long time since I connected to people. I did speak to Elizabeth recently. Elizabeth was kind enough to call me out here in St. John's to let me know about the transfer of ownership of the Housing Society, because she knew the blood, sweat, and tears that I'd spilled into that place. And so it's nice to see Elizabeth. And I know I caught a glimpse of Don Robertson there. I haven't heard from him, but anyways, I just really appreciate the privilege of being able to sit in and listen to stories from different eras. And it just conjures up all sorts of stories in my mind, which I'd have to really think about how I could encapsulate something that would be do justice to my experience there. But I really wanted to be able to come back and see the old building before it got knocked down, but the pandemic sort of got in the way. But I hope to be back when the new one rises from the rubble and walk through those doors and be blown away. So thank you very much for putting this on.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. So you're going to need to come to our next one in the fall, because we're going to keep creating space for stories, Stephen. So
yeah, I'll give it some. I got a few months to think that through and get one ready.
Love it. I love it. Well, with that, I can tell that so many people want to share. So I look forward to seeing you all in September. I'm going to pass it to Dr. Sarah Marsden, who, if you're following along with what's happening here, is leading some incredible groundbreaking systems change work. Sarah.
Hi, good afternoon. So glad to be here today, especially to be able to hear some of the stories of First United. It's such an inclusive and welcoming place, and I'm so honored to be working somewhere that has those values. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Eviction Mapping project. And for those of you who were here in October, I presented a little bit about what we were doing, and now we have some results that we can share. But for those of you who are unfamiliar with the project, I want to say a bit about what we're doing and why. So we see a lot of evictions from residential tenancies in our legal advocacy office all the time. We see people being evicted to homelessness fairly frequently. And by providing free legal services, one of the things we can do is make sure that people don't become homeless due to evictions. This work is really critical and a longstanding part of what we've done in advocacy, but alongside it, we are now going beyond individual advocacy to also look at the systems that create these situations for folks, so that we can advocate for changes that help our communities and foster long-term improvement. So for the Eviction Mapping project, this is not unique to BC, it happens in other jurisdictions. And it's just a way of looking at who's being evicted, how they're being evicted, and what the impacts are on people who are being evicted. And this started, of course, where we are in the downtown east side, but we have also had responses from all over BC as well. And we've been doing outreach quite extensively. You can see the card here, and this will let people fill in a survey. Sometimes we're in person with partner organizations or in our own shelter, just talking to people and getting their their stories, and we've done outreach on social media and all over the place, including amazing volunteers talking to people who have been evicted. And so we're presenting this to the public. I'll show you on the next slide. An eviction map where each dot represents and is where an eviction has taken place. And they're not exactly precise to the address, because of course we protect people's privacy, but just to give a view of the whole situation. And this is now publicly available. And in the next slide, you can see this is what happens if you click on a dot on the map. And you'll see you get a little bit of information about the person, demographic information if they've provided it, their family information, their income information, and you can see there's an audio clip there, which we don't have the technology to share that in this group, but on the website you could go and hear them. Some people are choosing to share their story by video, which is amazing, and by audio, so you can hear a bit more of what their situation is and what the impact was on them of being evicted. And our hopes for this project are not only to show the impact of individual evictions, but to be able to look at patterns and see that this is a systemic issue. So the public can look at this map to understand how widespread the problems are, and tenants can understand that they're not alone, and also that we're fighting for change. I should also mention, I can't see everyone on my screen, but if you want to unmute and jump in with a question anytime, please do so. So in the next slide, I want to show you that one of the first things we're reporting. So we're just starting to look. We've got about 600 reported evictions now in this project, and I want to show you some of the first findings we're reporting on. So we were saddened and shocked to see that eviction led to homelessness in more than 27% of all evictions of any type. We weren't actually specifically, we knew that homelessness was a risk. We weren't specifically collecting data on homelessness. This actually came out of our question about how much rent differential did you face? How much of an increase in rent basically did you face? And one of the answers that people could select was, I didn't find any place. And it turned out that that was the most common answer at 27%. And the kinds of homelessness people reported after eviction included living in low-cost motels, couch surfing, street homeless, people living in shelters, living in a car, all sorts of different situations that we've documented here in terms of the impact. And we saw people with families, people with kids, people with pets, people with jobs, lots of seniors on pensions who never expected to see their rent double or to become homeless. All sorts of people are represented in this group of folks who became homeless. And we saw the worst impacts on most vulnerable communities, including Indigenous people, people with disabilities, and people of color. So one of the most critical takeaways from this work is that preventing evictions would mean reducing homelessness on a larger scale. And you can see in this graphic that for Indigenous respondents, the impact of homelessness was more prevalent, 45%. So almost half of Indigenous people who had experienced an eviction ended up homeless. We're committed to reconciliation and action, and in this project, part of how we do this is addressing the disproportionate impacts on Indigenous people on an urgent basis. So the next finding I'd like to report on is neighborhood displacement. So not homelessness, but another form of displacement and another impact that's quite disruptive to communities. So even for those who found a home after they were evicted, more than 80% of respondents were displaced from their neighborhoods. Even if they paid more for rent, they still had to leave the neighborhood, severing their community relationships, disrupting work and children's school, and so on. And in the next slide, you can see that for Indigenous people, it was 91% of evictions that led to neighborhood displacement. And in addition to homelessness and displacement, we documented many other negative impacts of eviction, including mental and physical health, extreme financial impacts, family separation, risk to people's personal safety, and impacts on people's ability to work and sort of live a normal and functional life. And in order to understand how this was happening, we wanted to look at the reasons. Oh, sorry, I've got some quotes as well from respondents to the study that I want to just let you read. And just a couple more on the next slide. And these were not, these examples were chosen because they are representative of themes that we saw, not because they're the most extreme examples. We saw these 6 examples are highly representative of what we saw throughout people's eviction situations. I think that looks like it's the same slide as the first one again.
There's 2 slides there, Sarah. I've shown both of them.
Okay. So we wanted to understand a bit more about how this was happening so we could look at law reform. We found that the most common way people were being evicted, like when you think about eviction, a lot of what people think about in terms of stereotype would be, oh, you know, the tenant's done something wrong. And sometimes you see articles in the media, tenant hasn't paid, couldn't get rid of these horrible tenants, tenant's behavior was the problem. But actually that's really just a very small minority of evictions that we've documented. The vast majority were for landlord use, when the landlord says they want to move in and use the place, or when the landlord's sold the place and they're saying the buyer wants to move in. And of course that should, you know, that's something that should be allowed if people need to do that legitimately. But our concern is that these are being used just to get people out so landlords can ask for higher rent because they're entitled to ask for higher rent when they get a new tenant. So that seems to be what's happening. We have many instances where it's clear that the landlords were not actually moving in. This is a mechanism of eviction that is having this extremely prevalent, having devastating impacts. So between landlords use is about 60%. In contrast to non-payment of rent is about 10%. So just trying to kind of focus on areas that we could look at for legal changes in the Residential Tenancy Act. And right now there's a very strong financial incentive, obviously, for landlords to try and get people out. Lower income tenants are suffering for this, and middle income tenants are also suffering for this now. And in BC, there's no requirement for the landlord to provide evidence of their eviction. That's something we'd like to change in the law reform platform. So what are we going to do with this information? We're going to be advocating for very specific changes to the law based on evidence, ours, but also other research that we can draw on from colleagues who are doing other work on this. We want to reduce unnecessary evictions. We want to reduce the harms that follow from unnecessary evictions, especially in this housing crisis. And especially for things like asking for there to be a hearing to consider all the evidence, to consider the tenants' needs, to consider the impact on tenants, families, children, Indigenous people, vulnerable communities before an eviction can take place, because we are treating housing like a right in this project. And much of what we're asking for is already the law in other jurisdictions, like in Ontario. So in short, it doesn't have to be this way. And we are looking for a change based on what we're hearing from the community in this project. Thanks. I'm happy to answer anyone's questions about this.
Any questions? We can maybe unshare screen. We're over 5:15, but happy to stay longer, of course. There's nothing like it in BC, shockingly. Does anyone have a question? Do I see a hand? I see a hand from Ross. Hi, Ross.
Yes.
Sarah?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the Naramata Center?
I think I've heard of it.
So it has a number of dwellings and has just recently evicted a person. And I think those who are interested in supporting the center should also cross-reference the story of what happened there with the eviction mapping process. I have no opinion because I don't know, but I think that's something close to home that we could all say, ooh, this touches us directly, or possibly does.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can compare that situation to what is being discussed here, being someone who knows the details about that. So I wouldn't want people to leave with the impression that that's what was going on at Naramata.
Thanks both. Thanks for the follow-up. Any other comments or questions about the eviction mapping? It is going at a pace that is quicker than expected. You'll keep hearing updates. But how about we're going to keep the Zoom room open for a few more moments. Maybe everyone can unmute and you can say hi to people, because there are people here who have such connections to this community and that building and the future of that building. So let's see what Zoom lets us do here and talking over each other.
Sorry, Amanda. Can I ask Sarah a question? Sarah, what about any kind of process for like the casual or informal arrangements people have for housing that seems stable and then can just drop away, you know, at the drop of a hat? Because that's such a vulnerable and unsafe way for people to be housed, but I think it's pretty common. Are there any safeguards?
Yeah, so there's actually a couple. Thanks for the question. One of the things we have been looking at is informal evictions, which make up quite a large proportion of evictions in BC. So there can be informal evictions from people who have a paper lease, but there are also informal evictions from people who have an informal arrangement. And sometimes there are informal evictions from people who aren't covered by the Residential Tenancy Act at all because they have a roommate situation or they're not living in a complete like self-contained suite. And I'm not sure, I think the latter is probably what you're talking about in terms of informal arrangements, like roommate, house share, that sort of thing. Or just maybe even anyone without a paper lease. It's definitely something. It wasn't, I didn't present on it today, but definitely that's something that came up a lot. People asking, you know, am I even covered? What if I'm sharing the kitchen with my landlord? Because more and more people are no longer able to afford to be in a self-contained unit, but they still have a need for housing and you know, an entitlement to housing. Right. So it's absolutely on our radar. Thanks for that question.
And Sarah, we have a question from Grace around MAID actually. Are you hearing of any elders choosing MAID because they don't want to be homeless and can't afford rent?
So yeah, I haven't seen that in what we have, but it is definitely adjacent to some things I have heard, including some in-depth interviews I've done with seniors in BC who really are terrified of what's going to happen in their housing situation. And I know I've seen some media reports of that, and I've seen some things also in you know, in social media discussions where this is starting to be something that people discuss. Obviously very, very distressing, and just a signal that something is really broken in the way we're thinking about housing, if this is the situation that people find themselves in. So it's not something I've documented, but it's certainly consistent with things that we are documenting.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to invite the Director of Development here and Communications, Katie, has a door prize. I forgot about the door prize. Can't take me anywhere. I got a little prompt. Stuff to give away.
Can't forget the gift card. So yeah, as you might know, we were offering a $25 gift card to our sweet dear friends over at Terra Breads. And so during this presentation, we pulled a winner, and the winner is Bonnie Watts. Congratulations, Bonnie. Oh, you're muted. I can't hear you.
Thank you very much. I know just who I know just who to share these with. So thank you.
Perfect. Amazing. We'll pop it in the mail for you, Bonnie. I know we have your address up to date.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right.
And with that, if everyone wants to take themselves off mute to say hellos and goodbyes, we'll keep the Zoom line open for a couple more minutes.
Goodbye.
And leave if you need to.
Okay, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks
Bye.
for joining,
Good to see
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
It's Heather. I just want to thank everybody for coming to this and being so engaged in the whole thing. And Amanda and all of those who put this together. This has been a great toast talk. Thank you.
Everyone.
Load on. Evans, how do you do?
Good, Stephen. How are you?
Good. Great to see you.
Reunion, let's do this. You're all coming back in September when we do another one and share more stories, right?
Right.
Absolutely.
That's the next book.
The next book.
The next book, Stories of Hope. You know, hope lives here. Now here's the stories.
Oh, Bob's still on the call. Jennifer's got a title for you.
I want to say hi to Linda Irvin. It's been a long time.
I put a story in the chat about the days when Canadian Memorial served meals at first, and that was a really good ministry, and we really missed it when it ended. So
I wonder if there's anybody left who took the cut course way back in when was it? Spring of '72, I think. I took the Canadian Urban Training course, and we stayed at First United Church. Yeah, and we had to go out on a weekend from Friday to Sunday on the street.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow.
I saw Linda's hand up. You did it too, it appears.
Yep.
Yeah. Incredible.
Long time.
I did my internship at First United in 1992 to 3, I think, and learned such invaluable information there. And I'm so grateful for it.
Oh, hi.
I can speak to the cut course. It's in the archives now. But I was a trainer of trainers. I did my training in Montreal when I first came to First United Church, which was in 1976. I went in 1977 to Montreal to do my training, then became a trainer of trainers. And we did training with Naramata Center. We did training with Vancouver School of Theology, Brian Tejera, Derek Evans, and myself, and my friend whose name I've just forgotten, a Métis woman from Manitoba. We all worked together in doing that kind of training at VST. And then I was a supervisor. Jack Shaver he did a lot of work with students, but also with congregations, because there was a congregational part of that cut program. So there was that we did a lot of training. So I was just talking to Central Okanagan United Church a few days ago, and the Interfaith Committee that we're working on around homelessness, to suggest that maybe we might want to reignite that old training program for our congregations, our interfaith congregations. So I'm hoping maybe my old pal Keith Simmons, who's not so old, and I might be able to get that off the ground before I retire again.
That sounds good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah, it was really good stuff. And of course, we updated it over the years, and then money and politics in the church and all that kind of thing, it kind of came to an end. But it's safely packed away with Blair Gaston at the archives, and more to come. Here in St. John's, here in BC, and in St. John's with Lorraine Michael, who was also a trainer of trainers. But yeah.
Good memory. Good to see you all. Thank you.
Enjoy the evenings, everyone. An official goodbye. Okay.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
bye.